Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to ULT San Diego, here for the Aquarian series. The title of this afternoon's presentation is Moderation and Excess, and this will be given to us by Jonathan Colbert, and our chairperson for this afternoon is Ken Small. Before we begin, a reading from the Voice of the Silence. O teacher, what shall I do to reach to wisdom? O wise one, what to gain perfection? Search for the paths, but O Lanu, be of clean heart before thou startest on thy journey. Before thou takest thy first step, learn to discern the real from the false, the ever-fleeting from the everlasting. Learn above all to separate head learning from soul wisdom, the eye from the heart doctrine. Yea, ignorance is like unto a closed and airless vessel, the soul a bird shut up within. It warbles not, nor can it stir a feather, but the songster mute and torpid sits, and of exhaustion dies. But even ignorance is better than head learning, with no soul wisdom to illuminate and guide it. The seeds of wisdom cannot sprout and grow in airless space. To live and reap experience, the mind needs breadth and depth and points to draw it towards the diamond soul. Seek not those points in Maya's realm, but soar beyond illusions. Search the eternal and the changeless Sat, mistrusting fancies, false suggestions. For mind is like a mirror. It gathers dust while it reflects. It needs the gentle breezes of soul wisdom to brush away the dust of our illusions. Seek, O beginner, to blend thy mind and soul. We now give to you our very own Jonathan Colbert. Yes.
Thank you, Monica. Well, thank you all for coming. And today, this whole year, the theme has been the lamp of spiritual discernment, which is actually a phrase in the Gita in chapter 10. And there's a whole chapter on spiritual discernment in the Gita. It would be chapter 7. So we'll be tapping into chapter 7 of the Gita today. And we will naturally, given this topic, moderation and excess, we'll be taking a look at the Buddha's middle way. So we will also be looking at a couple of quotes here in the almanac for this week. The lead quote is from Hermes: is to do less is to do more. One will have a great opportunity to keep oneself intact without getting into syndromes of excessive expectation and rapid disillusionment. So, but again, like the whole year, really, if you look at every single topic this whole year, it has to do with the idea of discernment, discerning action, discerning thinking, discerning speech. And so we have, for example, there's 6 talks this year on noetic, different things. Noetic metaphysics, noetic psychology, noetic action, and I think we've got one coming up on noetic discipline, you just mentioned. And then there's another one coming up after that called noetic devotion. So these are all interesting questions, but in other words, it's a discerning approach to action, you could say. In other words, living the theosophical life. And in this way, we can try to emulate those great lodge of Mahatmas and adepts who are really the custodians of this entire system. And they've been so for millions and millions of years. And they're not just custodians in that they keep libraries going. They do that, but that's only part of things. They're not just custodians in that they know the system, they know the philosophy. They're the continuity of this entire wisdom religion system by embodying the teachings. That is the continuity that they offer. So it's not just an institutional continuity, it's a lived continuity in everyday life. And in the effort of this idea of the lamp of spiritual discernment, appearing and reappearing in different talks and different themes for this year, we too can begin to emulate these teachers, these wise beings who keep this wisdom alive in this world by embodying it. And so we can do the best we can with that too. And in that way, perhaps we can be like a lens and a mirroring of their radical, deep ideation. And we can try to mirror that kind of living the life on this plane. Now, we just now read or heard from the Voice of Silence about the idea of the mind being like a mirror, and that the mind periodically needs some way to get the dust off. And it says there in the voice, it's the gentle breezes of soul wisdom. So hopefully we'll be able to offer a few of those ideas. Plus, in the question and answer period, all you guys in the audience can offer your gentle breezes of soul wisdom to help us understand this. The topic of moderation and excess. For a while in my mind, I was calling it in my own mind excess and moderation. But then all of a sudden I looked at the almanac. Wait a minute, it's moderation and excess. And there's been a lot of topics this year dealing with the 7 deadly sins. So it'll be like sloth and vigilance or something like that. Or actually, they would have said vigilance and sloth, for example. In other words, the positive first. And that seems to be the suggestion. If you look in Crosby in his article about New Year's resolutions, he makes that point very strong that you want to focus on the positive. Acknowledge the shadow, but don't really focus on the shadow. That's not the main thing. The main thing is the positive. So even if you're looking at the 7 deadly sins, you can match them up with an opposite and focus on that opposite. And then the so-called shadow side will take care of itself, if that makes sense. The person has to acknowledge, but then move on. But the main thing is the positive. That's why the 7 paramitas are very fine in the voice, because they focus on the actual virtues. And then, of course, there's going to be shadow things, but the main thing is the virtues. Speaking of virtues, in the almanac for today, the 13th, Thomas Fuller, he says, moderation is the silken string running through the pearl chain of all virtues. So apparently this topic has to do with proportion and ratios, and that's kind of the centralizing theme of moderation. So instead of it just being kind of like these guardrails, I don't know if anybody remembers going to Disneyland a long, long time ago. You get in those little bumper cars, and they have these guards on both sides, and you can kind of drive ahead and bounce into somebody else. I don't even know if they still have that ride, but that whole thing is all you really have to know is where the gas pedal is. and then you just kind of bounce and you get your way through the whole thing, But and if you're clever, you try and not hit things and so forth. But it's all about those guardrails. This topic, I think, and I'm hoping that I can demonstrate, is really about becoming centered, and that's the whole gist of the uplifting side of moderation. So instead of it just being the lower mind avoiding things, it's actually focusing on that which is the highest within us, so that we can begin to practice the virtues with wisdom in a noetic way, in a positive way. And like in our ULT declaration, it talks about the exemplification in practice. So in a way that we can actually live these ideas. So in the Gita, chapter 7, there's an interesting statement. Well, there's quite a few interesting statements. There's one very tantalizing statistic, you could say, where Krishna says, really only 1 in a million people understand me as I am. And the way he says it is that it's 1 in 1,000 who is a seeker for wisdom. Not too many. But of that 1 in 1,000, only 1,000 within that number, only 1 in 1,000 within that 1,000, and it really comes to know me as I am. So 1,000 times 1,000 is 1,000,000. That's why I'm trying to say that that's the statistics. Only 1 in a million people. But not to distress, because that means if there's 8 billion people on the planet, then the math comes out to 8,000 people know Krishna as he is. But anyway, the point is not the numbers, but it's the idea that it's a rare thing for people to really understand the higher self and to really understand who they are. And if there's anything that a person figures out in theosophy, is that, wait a minute, I'm not who I think I am. And I'm actually something much deeper than that. I'm actually a reincarnating ego. And I would even claim that many of us theosophists, we like the idea of reincarnation, and we like to think about, hey, maybe I was somebody in my last life or whatever we think about. But in terms of actually living as if reincarnation is true, that is a radical, revolutionary thought. And it recalibrates the whole way one thinks of how one lives one's life. The excesses that we actually do, based on the one life theory, I have to get this done. I've only got this amount of years, or something like that. We all get into that. Or I have to learn this by this time. The whole thing gets shrunken down into these really narrow time frames. And it's not philosophical, because theosophically, we've got thousands of lifetimes, really, Now, they say that there's no time better than now to begin the path. That's true. So carpe diem in that sense. But in terms of actual mileposts, it's just illusionary, and it leads to all kinds of excesses. And for example, sometimes we load up our lives with way too many things, just no leisure time, no time for reflecting. It's just go, go, go. And we're like driven. And so in that sense, is a person really getting any much benefit out of this idea of reincarnation? The lower self and the incarnated self, the personality, so forth, the mechanism of consciousness that deals with everyday life, can become to be too much, and it can put forth an exaggerated perception, really, of this. And there's that expression in chapter 6 of the Gita where it says the higher self must raise up the lower self, and that's really talking about meditation. But it's also talking about how one can live one's life. And the lower self can be either the friend of the higher self or not so much the friend. And it says actually the word enemy. So by distorted perceptions, that becomes the enemy of the higher self. Well, who is this higher self? We mentioned before that really, like Crosby admonishes and advises, that really we need to take the position of the reincarnating ego. And that the reincarnating ego has a whole different agenda than what we think it does. It has to do, there's a whole wisdom that and it is so wise that it puts forth a curriculum for each lifetime, really. And so all of these lessons that we're learning, really the inspiration for the program of these lessons is really coming from ourselves. So whatever the karma situations that we get ourselves involved in, we can know that at some level, it is I myself who have chosen this situation, this opportunity, this seeming dilemma, this set of choices, etc. What else can be said about the higher self? Because if we can get to what this idea of what the higher self is, then we're coming closer to this idea of knowing what Krishna is, which is a very hard thing to do, right? But it's not impossible. The higher self, just imagine what kind of a being, what kind of a God, what kind of an entity could live to be millions of years old. So that if you can start to use the imagination, what kind of a vesture might such a being occupy? You know, is it made out of the akasha? What's it made out of? Something very durable, something very indestructible. And Krishna talks about that higher self within us as in the second chapter of the Gita, where he talks about that which is indestructible within us. And it's the fire can't burn it, the water can't wash it away, the wind can't blow it away, etc. There's something indestructible within us. Another clue might be that it's like the Vishnu principle. Vishnu really means the idea of to pervade. And it's also transcendent and it's immanent. That's why it's so helpful that we had this great talk last week on transcendence and immanence. And because that's talking about God, man, and nature. But within that category is ourselves, right? We're in there somewhere. So, in other words, there's this transcendent, divine, immortal, indestructible aspect to ourselves. And that is ultimately where the sense of moderation actually comes from. And we'll try to take a look at that through the lens of the Buddha's middle way. Buddha was one of these great sacrificial beings who, even though he didn't need to learn anything, he has already graduated the whole system, incarnated into a human form to recapitulate everything that we need to learn. That's a sacrifice. And as a young man, he went out into the forest and he found ascetics who were very stern and severe the way they lived their lives. And they didn't eat, they just lived on the forest. They fasted all the time, very disciplined people, and he joined them. And he came to a point, he probably pushed the boundaries more than they did because he was so sincere, right? Where he almost died. So, and fortunately, a peasant girl named Sujata, who lived either in the forest or near the forest, found him, and she was able to give him some rice and some milk and bring him back to life, really. And the Buddha had decided at that point that there's got to be some kind of a middle way here, because to overindulge in austerities on the one hand, or to overindulge in a sensuous existence on the other hand, either one of them is not really better than the other. In other words, the austerities is equally extreme and not productive, and doesn't really lead to the edification of the soul. That's kind of a Buddha kind of a concept. Does it lead to edification or not? So that these extremes, there is such things as extremes. And there's a quote in the almanac that I noticed from Pico della Mirandola. Nothing too much prescribes a standard for all the virtues through the doctrine of the mean. So there's this idea of the doctrine of the mean, which normally you associate with Confucius and Aristotle, and apparently Pico della Mirandola. And he actually talks about proportion, that everybody really lives according to a divine proportion, and that everybody lives within a circle and everyone follows a line. But whatever it is, it has to do with proportion and balance. And that's the idea of the middle way. And so you can, even the Four Noble Truths were an expression of the middle way, really. The cause of suffering is getting out of balance. Why? Because of craving. Is there a solution? Yes, there is. The middle way. Ultimately, he gets to the point of delivering the Eightfold Path, which is really the fourth of the Four Noble Truths. And the first of the Eightfold Path is the idea of right perspective, of right perception. And some people say the right philosophy. Okay, Robert Crosby would say right ideas, and he spends time talking about how ideas that are out of balance are quite limiting, really. And so, in other words, the idea is to have a balanced perspective on metaphysics, on psychology. And for example, Theosophy would say that karma and reincarnation offer just that, because that's offering a line of a dynamic path, the karma and reincarnation, and it's offering a rationale, and it offers a time frame that we don't have to worry about becoming Mahatmas like in the next 10 minutes. That's not a thing. You don't need to worry about it. Not going to happen anyway. But the thing is it's a de-stressor thing. And that way we can, with this idea of moderation, we can actually stay intact, okay, and not thrown off balance, really. If you take a look at the next of the Eightfold Path, you have right thought. And that seems, thought, mind is thought, will, and feeling. So it isn't just right thinking or wrong thinking. It's thought that has to do with the directionalizing the mind. Which direction is the mind going to go? Is it going to go off balance, or is it going to work with harmony? Same thing with feelings, and the same thing with will. Will has to do with what kind of resolves that we participate in. Are we resolving to move forward in a balanced way or not? You could ask that question. Likewise, with right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Is there balance? Does speech reflect the second of the paramitas, Shila, of harmony in thought and deed, and so forth? Does one actually do what one says one's going to do? Is there harmony between word and act? Same thing with action. Action would be economy of movement. Says here, to do less is to do more. Right action would be noetic, deliberative, thoughtful action. Same thing with right livelihood. Is one's livelihood have anything to offer? Is it contributing to universal welfare in a small way? It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be big and grandiose. Matter of fact, we're going to get into that a little bit later in this little presentation. The other three have to do with right effort. And that's for sure, one can ask oneself, am I participating in a balanced, moderate, temperate way with effort? Am I trying too hard? That's an interesting question. I remember working for one employer years ago. He said, don't give me 110%. He says, just give me 100%. 100% is great. You know, that's, in other words, straining becomes kind of egotistical. You could say, look at me, I'm really trying. There's that dimension, and anything that has to do with that which is egotistical is going to have excess to it, and it's not going to be the path of moderation. And there's right mindfulness. So is a person moderate and temperate in terms of keeping track of one's thoughts? Does a person keep a diary? Is a person, do they have the sense of viraga to be able to have some kind of distance from their thoughts to be able to observe them? And also the final one is right meditation. And theosophically, there's the idea, there's two kinds of meditation really that theosophy even talks about. One is a line of life meditation. So what would be a balanced approach to that? Can a person generate a current throughout one's life so that one's line of life meditation isn't sporadic and unbalanced, starting and stopping? Can a person develop a sense of continuity of consciousness? So that's one kind of meditation. You know, one pointedness throughout, 24/7, 365, etc. It's a goal. A person's not going to do any of this stuff right away, right? But the other would be periodic meditation. Taking advantage of the biorhythms of the body and of the day. So it would be like some people, they set aside maybe a half an hour, 45 minutes every day. And they think about higher, uplifting, exalted ideas. But whatever it is, it has to have calmness. It has to have the unruffled mind, as the Mahatmas would say. So these are applications, you could say, and that the idea really of the Eightfold Path really is an expression of Buddha's middle way. There is, we could apply this exercise to 5 pairs of opposites that are mentioned in a letter that became very widely known in the Theosophical movement. And we call it the Great Master's Letter. And it was, or the Mahachohan's letter. So this being is unnamed. Apparently it's too sacred, but he is the teacher of the teachers, really. The reason I say he, because you could say he, she, or it, is only because in the Mahatma letters, they refer to this Chohan as a he. So I'm just going to go along with that. But the point is that at a certain point, I think it was in 1881, where he said, look, it's important if we're going to have a theosophical movement at all, that we get down to basics with really the ABCs of spiritual development. And it isn't about developing psychic powers. That's just out of balance. You've got materialistic science on the one hand, you've got superstitious religion on the other. They're both out of balance. It's really time for theosophy to enter the arena, which is a balanced system that there's a sublime spirituality that can be discovered through science, through the development of the principle of buddhi. And there's a noble approach to the divinity of man. It's not superstitious. And that is the unwarping of the monist principle. If you can think of spirituality in a way that's not superstitious. And the whole idea is that it's not focusing on ideas from the outside coming in. It's developing anything noetic is going to become from above, below, and from within, without. It's got to be organic. And then there'll be that golden mean in terms of a path forward. So, okay, so anyway, he also mentions, he's saying, look, if theosophy is any good for anything, it's got to be able to help explain and help people understand these 5 different seeming opposites. And one of them is pleasure and pain. And these things are all going to sound like the ABCs. Why are all these intelligent people thinking about ABCs? Well, according to this teacher, it's very important to focus on the ABCs, to be spiritually grounded. So pleasure and pain. Well, isn't that the root of all addiction? Isn't the epidemic of addiction that we all have, whether it has to do with drugs or alcohol, which is the obvious kind, but there's the addiction to the physical body, so that we're terrified of death. Okay. There's the addiction to our agendas that we think are oh so important. There's all kinds of addictions. There's the addiction to our personalities. I think I'm so and so. And it's so hard to get away from it. And then, interestingly enough, there is possibly a philosophical solvent to this thing about addiction, because it has to do, we're learning, with the generation of dopamine in the brain. So what are we really addicted to? We're addicted to the dopamine. Okay, that's the chemical. Not that it's good or bad, but I'm saying that's what we're addicted to. Well, then, philosophically, because everything is sevenfold, what's going on with dopamine? Everybody says that it's the reward chemical. So now we're addicted to a reward. So what philosophically can we talk about with reference to reward? Well, in the Bhagavad Gita, it's talking about engagement in action for the sake of duty without concern for reward. So that's an interesting thing. Now we're being given an alternative to think about instead of the reward that I think I need. Maybe there's another reason to perform duty. So in that sense, we can all become golden kshatriyas, you could say, and noble warriors, really. And that there's a sense of duty that transcends the normal conventional sense of duty. So it's just kind of a reset. And so it's a way of thinking through kind of a golden mean through this whole thing about pleasure and pain. The same thing can be done with altruism and egotism. That's another one of the 5 sets. Is my altruism egotistical? That's a question. It seems like the most direct way of dealing with this polarity. Is there a purification that could take place? Is there such thing as pure altruism? Are there beings that exemplify non-attached altruism? Could I make resolves, small resolves that could move in this direction? Another one is right and wrong. Am I a dogmatic about what I think is right? And do I get overly excited about other people having a different sense of right and wrong than I do, for example? So am I really focusing on this? Am I absolutizing the relative? In other words, what's right and wrong, good and evil, etc. A lot of this is relative to context. And so this is why in the Yuletide Declaration, we don't get too much mixed up into side issues. trying to stay with the philosophy, because that's what's going to keep us at kind of a pendulum pivot point in the center to be able to assess things properly. And the same thing with good and evil, same thing. And then the final one, is liberty and despotism. These, isn't it amazing that 130 or something years ago, this being put out these 5 polarities that's got all of our society right now into a major period of self-questioning. It's what everybody's thinking about, these 5 things, really. What's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's evil? What is real service? What is actually fooling ourselves? And then this thing about liberty and despotism. So one idea that might be a measured, balanced approach to that is, instead of focusing on the external, about who's a despot and what is liberty, and if I only had $1 million, I could be free, or all this stuff. It'd be something more like, am I magnanimous and generous with those who are around me? Am I patient with other points of view? Or am I a despot and insist that everybody thinks what I think? So it's kind of an internal working on oneself for the service of others that would be kind of a measured, proportional, balanced approach, it would seem. There is a document that I'm not sure how many people really know about, and it appeared in Theosophy magazine in 1920 in October. So everybody get out your 1920 Theosophy magazines for October. There's an article there that appeared, and it's called "What is Occultism?" And it's 14 statements that students of Judge put together that they culled out of his writings in different places. Now, I'm not going to try and remember all the 14, but they basically, it's stated in the negative. Everything is occultism is not this, occultism is not that. The basic thing of it is, it's not the development of psychic powers. A lot of them, like 5 or 6 of them, have to do with speech. And they all have to do, in one way or another, with silence or secrecy, you could say, which in turn is rooted in silence, which in turn is rooted in reticence, which in turn is rooted in reverence. The very first one says that, what is occultism? Occultism is reticence about not saying everything that one knows. So, which is another reason why this previous presentation that we heard last week about the transcendent and the immanent, there's a certain ratio of that which is transcendent that one keeps sacred in one's heart. In other words, a person doesn't just talk about everything that they've thought of. And it's likewise, it's the same with other things. Occultism is not repeating everything that one has heard other people say. It's not reporting everything that one has ever seen. Instead, there's a mysterious thing that says, instead, it's reverting to the source of sight. So that's a whole turning inward kind of a dimension of what this topic seems to represent. But it talks about other things. It talks about not being in a hurry. Occultism is not being in a hurry on the spiritual path, for example. And not worrying about one's own progress. Occultism is not trying to do big, great things all the time. Momentous, things that people talk about. Instead, to take joy, it says, in the fact that other people can do great things, that other people might be able to do them better than you. It even talks like that. So now this article, if a person wants to get kind of quick access to it, I believe it's on theosophytrust.org under other authors. And it's anonymous because it's really judged, because anonymously somebody put together those expressions of wisdom. So these are some beginning ideas on this topic, and we would very much look forward to having a discussion about further development of this idea of moderation and excess. So,
thank you, Jonathan. I liked your question. Is my altruism egotistical? The thought comes to mind, motivation is talked about a lot. Motivation then would seem to me to have both conscious and unconscious elements. So then the deeper question would be, how do we clarify our motivation? Open to the
yeah, it's open to
audience
the,
also.
to the group for
Yeah.
sure.
Judy.
Oh,
Yes, yeah, I have a comment and a question. The Bhagavad Gita seems to be all about spiritual moderation. I mean, it says meditation that destroys pain is not given to him who sleeps too little or given to overwatching or too little or to someone who eats too much or too little. It goes on like that. And it seems that we need to find a kind of spiritual moderation in our lives because I know when all of us have the experience like of going to college, there are the types that study too much and then those that party every night. And that's clearly clear out of balance. And you shouldn't be a geek that has no fun. On the other hand, you need to do your work and get it done and do it on a regular basis and not leave everything to cramming. The other question is, how do we carry this into the spiritual life? I mean, there are those who perhaps are overbalanced on karma yoga, those who may do only uh, bhakti and not study, and those who may do nothing but study. So I think the Gita is telling us we've got to do all of these to really achieve Raja Yoga. Do you think that is the case?
oh well, yeah, I do. I think it's one of the things that struck me about the Gita is that Krishna's telling Arjuna that he's got to learn to meditate. Here's this guy who's the most amazing warrior on the planet, right? If you read the Mahabharata, but meditation's part of the curriculum here, to really engage in duty, apparently. So he could say, no, meditation, that's for other people. I'm a warrior, but apparently not. So, but the question that the chair raised about how do we really get to motivation, especially with this reference to, is my altruism egotistical? That's a good question. But don't you think it has to do with a person has to get some kind of an elevation? When a person has to get higher than the problem that they're trying to solve somehow. And it's one thing to limit meditation to being calm and being mindful, but it seems that Theosophy seems to really introduce the idea of a vertical dimension to everything, including mindfulness. So, you know, again, this is an interesting time to be alive because meditation is being not only made available to millions of people, instead of just monks and monasteries of whatever orders there are, There's nothing wrong with monks and monasteries, but the thing is it's kind of being made available to so many people. It's being kind of universalized and democratized, you could say, in terms of access. But a theosophical meditation is very interesting in the way that we're given all these universal ideas that are very abstract and that seem to carry us up with the elevation of these ideas, if we think about them, become grounded in the unmanifest, as it was talked about last week. So it seems like any kind of an accurate assessment of anything has to be from above below, and a person has to attain the altitude. So you could make an analogy for mountain climbing, which is not easy, right? You have to overcome your own inertia and your own weight, your own gravity, and so forth. And a person has to be careful, and there's hazards and so forth. And it's different kind of air, different kind of weather at high altitudes. Another analogy would be airplanes, where you can fly, and there is a certain takeoff and landing issue with flight, and it's usually limited to special people that are good at aviation. But the thing is we're all being kind of enjoined to do that as far as humanity is concerned right now. Life is getting so out of balance, you could say, that you almost have to meditate in order to survive, in a way. So that's really almost a mandate, to figure it out. But do you have what would you think
About
the motive thing?
motivation.
How do you get a certain kind of honesty with reference to motivation?
Again, it has to do with being attached to outcomes, results. So then losing oneself in the positive sense. So when the person, the activity, and the object are merged as one thing and not as seeking a specific result, I think then motivation becomes purified automatically. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. But this isn't something that is a one and done deal. It's a practice that has to be done perpetually. It's a continuous engagement.
You got three hands on there, and you got my. But you have to direct traffic here.
Monica.
Well, I'm thinking about this tete-a-tete with the altruism and egotism. And I'm wondering if, like the quote by Mr. Judge, where he says, acting for and as the self of all. It would seem that that's one kind of meditation, the meditation that you want to be engaged in throughout your day, somehow to remember to revert back to that when if you forget, or as you find yourself getting involved and liking yourself for being this, this person who likes to give. But I'm thinking about also what you said about the vertical aspect of this. And I think people, the earth plane sort of pushes us, let's say, to expand in the other way. And we know that really well, But the vertical, I would think, is really, it's got to be helpful in creating that balance that you would want. But I'm wondering how do you do that in an exoteric world where it's almost there's so many jobs that are built on personality in that way. So I'm wondering how does a person bring this decided help from above vertically into the externalized and widening atmosphere that you can get caught up in without even realizing it. It would think that there are plenty of spiritual people who don't even realize that their ego is quite involved in this altruism. So I'm just wondering, what is it? Is it a formal meditation that we set aside every day? Is it how we decide to operate when we're working in this altruistic sort of work? And then how do you bring the two together? How do you bring yourself to a point where you know that balance is there?
Great question.
I don't know.
Good.
Want me to? Oh, what? You're gonna click something? Oh. Okay, I'll just mention a couple things unless,
Go ahead.
okay. Well, it's this student's humble experience that if a person does, that there's a relationship between periodical meditation and the line of life's meditation. And actually, there's been some academic studies of this. And they were conducted about 20 years ago with the cooperation of the Dalai Lama. And he offered 8 or 10 of his high lamas. And the authors of the study, they called them adepts. So the Dalai Lama sent these adepts. Okay, so I don't know about that. It could be. I mean, I wouldn't want to say no, there weren't adepts, but maybe they were. But I don't know anything about that. Point is they were advanced meditators. Okay, that's for sure. And they and one of them was Mathieu Ricard. Okay, so all of them were Tibetans, but one of them was a French scientist with a PhD in biology, I think, engineering, something. But he renounced his whole career and went to Nepal and meditated for 35 years. Okay. So the point is that in the latter part of his life, he kind of rededicated himself to using all of his science training in relationship to the study of meditation with the Dalai Lama and others. And one of the things that the scientists were interested in, I'm citing from a book called Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, or something like that. But the scientists were very much interested in periodic meditation and its relationship to the baseline of meditation. Okay, so does the periodic meditation affect the baseline? Now, they don't have vertical measuring points. All they have is brain waves to study. But it's an interesting analogy because apparently these high lamas were able to reach these really high states and produce unbelievable amounts of gamma rays and unbelievable amounts of joy. Okay. And then their baseline of emissions, just 24/7, was also populated with a lot of gamma rays, amongst other things. So in other words, they concluded that the periodic meditation was very much affecting the baseline. So this is not the same as what we're talking about. It's got some overlap, but the success criteria, because you asked, well, how do we know about success? Or how do we know when we're kind of in the zone, you could say, would be something not about gamma rays and all that stuff. It could include that, but that's not our main criteria. The main criteria is, are we finding a sense of balance and spiritual grounding, really, from which to proceed and to live a life of service, really, And it's this humble student's observation that the periodic meditation is very helpful with that, to the point where when things get out of control in this humble student's life, or I can't sit down and meditate and all that stuff, after a day or two, there's a different feeling. Have you ever noticed that? You know what I'm saying? If you start a rhythm like that, that kind of, I can't describe it, but it's different. And then you kind of miss it, you know, and you think, okay, I got to get back to my center here, that kind of a thing, you know.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I answered the question, but I sure did take a long time.
Absolutely, you are. But just one little point, since you brought up Tibet, we think of Tibet as a powerful spiritual center from which, you know, to some degree, whether reading or visiting, we all get this sense of peace. And I'm thinking of what is going on in Tibet right now. It is in such a violent upheaval. You know, how do they get help? Is it cycles or somebody helping them to remember? But it's I don't know, if the headlines are about violence in Tibet, it just is frightening. And so I would like some ideas.
Tragic situation.
Yeah,
very sad.
To be.
Let's move on to some other questions from other.
You got 3 hands up.
Yeah.
I'm sure the blood is starting to run out.
Yeah, Robert Moore.
Yes, thank you very much, Jonathan. That was really a wonderful and soothing presentation. Mr. Judd says that if we desire truth with the same intensity that we had formerly wished for success, money, or gratification, we will speedily acquire meditation and possess concentration. And the reason I quote that is it doesn't seem like moderation means that there's not a certain intensity. Here it talks about an intensity for truth that we might get a feeling for in terms of the way we formerly desired success and gratification. So I wondered if you had any ideas there, you know, like blow hot or cold, not lukewarm kind of deal.
Yeah, that's a good question, because moderation sounds like something that's very almost namby-pamby. It's not intense. It's like, what are you even doing? And so forth like that, right? But think about Judge's last words that he uttered. Hold fast, go slow. That's intense. And the fact that he pulled off saying that as his last words. That talk about a line of life's meditation coming to a moment and having presence of mind. Do you have anything on that?
Well, in Buddhism, of course, you know, we say truth, or we say, you know, might say that the truth will make one free, right? But then we must perhaps distinguish between relative and absolute truth. So this is not talking about relative truth at all, I don't think, but the absolute truth in Buddhism or in Theosophy. And so that is, of course, it is the insight that arises from a meditative state is the way to experience that level of truth. So in that sense, those things come together like that. That's my 2 cents anyway. Anyway, David Grossman.
Hey there. Thanks for your talk. It certainly brought up a lot to think about, Jonathan. One thing that struck me about altruism, could we say that a truly altruistic acts are generally spontaneous? Maybe that would cut out sort of the ego aspect, you know, why we're, you know, there's this story about this guy who robbed a bank, and he was running down the street, and all of a sudden he saw this kid jump into the street, and he dropped the bag and saved the kid. It was like a totally spontaneous act of altruism. So anyways, I wanted to bring up that idea. But the other one, and Robert was touching on this, the idea of moderation. How might we square that with the ideas of like pushing the envelope, or geniuses are people that break all the rules, or break some rules, and of course the great quote by William Blake, I'm sure you've heard this, that the road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom. You kind of touched on that maybe a little bit, but
Blake.
So, anyways, I thought I'd just throw those.
I mean, there's a saying, there's a proper measure in all things. But what that measure is appropriate to the situation, and that may be required to break through something, or to reach some unusual, innovative place, in the context of a stuck condition in oneself or in the society around one, may require, again, it's not a passivity.
No, I think that's the main thing here, that I didn't convey it in the talk. It should be brought out now. It's not a passivity, and that it's kind of like in some of the Upanishads, the spiritual life is really a razor's edge. There's not much. It's highly charged in a way. So in some ways, it's electric and very photic. So it's not for namby-pambies, you could say. Here's another thing, is that there's a famous maxim at Delphi in Greece of know thyself, right? That's the most famous. Does anybody know what the second most famous maxim is at Delphi? Or they just have one, just one maxim? They had another one, and it's almost equally famous, but it's not as famous as know thyself. It's nothing in excess. Isn't that interesting? That is considered to be that important, Nothing in excess, everything in moderation, everything in proportion, you could say. And, Pico della Mirandola talks about that a lot in his oration on the dignity of man. So something about the dignity of being human, of being able to know oneself, but at the same time, nothing in excess. It's like if we let the personality just take over and make a playground of the mind, then a person really knowing? Is the person really in contact with oneself anymore? Or has one become beside oneself, as they say? When we get out of control, we have to apologize. Oh, I'm sorry, I was beside myself. Anyway.
We have several more comments, and
I'll quit talking so much. Excess of talking, I apologize.
Desiree.
Hi, thank you, Jonathan. That's great. That's a wonderful presentation. Thank you for that gift. I am going back to the Hermetic statement, to do less is to do more. And I know we're asked to contemplate this idea of the action and inaction, and the inaction in action. Mm-hmm. Can you provide a little bit of explanation about those two ideas?
It have to do with agency. So in other words, to perform one's duty, does a person really have to do it in an ahankart way? Meaning, this is me, check me out, this is what I'm doing. Or it could be like David was saying, that the bank robber forgot that he was being selfish, and all of a sudden he became unselfish and did altruism to save someone. But do you have anything on that?
I'm going to
Well, just a little bit
go ahead.
further here with, so that's inaction and action. And then the idea of action in inaction, that to me is the idea that the mind is a very energetic, dynamic place. And ultimately, mind is really the dynamism of the entire universe. And it's definitely the dynamism of our lives in relation to karma. So it's always creating out energy. So even if a person is staying at home, there's a lot of action on the theosophical side of things. In fact, the word karma means action, right? You could say it means action and reaction, but ultimately it just means action. And so all of our thoughts, our words, everything that seems to be not action really is action. And we're responsible for it, but it's also an opportunity to do something really amazing. Think about Nelson Mandela, who was in jail for 27 years. He was thinking a lot of things anew in that time period. And there was a mini revolution going on in his heart and in his mind. And when he was released after 27 years, huge things happened. That didn't happen in a vacuum. There was a lot of action going on. And so anyway, these are some preliminary thoughts about that.
Someone asked him the time, 30 years, what had it done?
Right?
Yeah,
What did
he
he say?
said it's softened.
It almost seems like some action is just very like
Let's,
ineffective inertia, whereas
yeah,
other actions have much more of a universal impact, maybe.
we have short time. 2 people yet to share a little bit. Shobha,
Uh,
and then Laura.
yeah, hi.
And then,
First, I want to say fabulous. I loved your presentation, Jonathan. Thank you. I have just 2 comments. I mean, I know we are harping on this thing about moderation. I just couldn't help think about Through the Looking Glass, the queen. She keeps running to stay in one place, which I look at it as she's acting a lot, but yet remaining calm and still. I look at it like that. The other thing I thought about is this whole lecture that you gave, this whole presentation, you talked about hope right in the beginning. And I remembered what Shankaracharya said in the Viveka Chudamani, the press jewel of wisdom, where he says that the masters come like spring again and again. So I think there is hope here, there is potential, which is what you were trying to say. And the fact that words are not what they seem to be.
Laura,
Thank you.
who is still there?
Well, thank you. Just a quick comment there about nothing in excess. We as students, and that study the philosophy of theosophy know all too well that we cannot bury our nose in the books. That we have to perform our duty. We have to look after people around us and participate in their lives. And your talk sort of reminded me of what is said about that we should not develop one principle at the expense of another. And so there has to be that balanced approach, no excess, but moderation. Thank you for your talk.
Thank you. Yeah, that's brought out in the culture of concentration, that especially, where he talks about there's such thing as developing different psychic capacities and so forth. And really, Raja Yoga, which is what that article is about, is the nothing in excess, everything in moderation modality. Now, we are running out of time, and if we could get Hyro's question next time. We do have to close the meeting very soon. I was wondering, Desiree, do you think you could close the meeting? You're muted.
Before you close it, Desiree, I wanted to say that in the chat box, if anyone wants to capture it, is the link to the occultism article that Jonathan referred to.
Thank you, Laura. I did see that. So if anybody would like to get access to that article, click on that link. I'm going to just give a brief reading from Sri Raghavan Iyer. And hold on just one second while I find it. This is from his article, Universality and Sectarianism. Anyone may wish to become a companion of the Brotherhood of Initiates. Everyone in life may go through many initiations on many planes in many forms. But if he is sensitive and delicate, and in this is authentic and concerned with the sacred, he is going to be suspicious of people who talk about it out of season, people who call attention to it. He is going to be as embarrassed as any man would be in speaking too openly about parents he loves or about those closest to him, to those for whom it may mean nothing. He knows better than that. Of course, this has been done in the name of religion. It is a standard compensatory device offered, but it never worked. It did not work for the Brahmins, nor did it work in any single religion, whether for the Jews, the Egyptians, or Christians. It is not going to work for Theosophists today. But that does not mean that men should be caught in the dichotomy between saying, quote, oh, the sacred doesn't exist, end quote, and on the other hand, becoming insanely anxious about it. There is always a middle way. It is always possible for a person to gain access into the most exalted chambers of initiation, to take his place in various sanctuaries, even in this day and age, anywhere in this world. But whoever he be, he can only do that by taking vows, assuming trials with a certain courage, with a certain detachment, with an authentic compassion to do it only for the sake of the whole, and with a deliberate decision to be utterly uninvolved in worry, let alone waste of energy, on behalf of his own salvation. This requires a break with the salvationism that may have been part and parcel of the Piscean age, but will have no place in the future. William Quan Judge wrote of that future moment when powers will be needed and pretensions will go for naught. That was perhaps true even in his own day for a few. Today it is true at all levels. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Desiree.
Thank you, Desiree. And what about next week?
Next week, we're going to have our presentation will be on the unicorn, symbology of the unicorn. And we'll see you here all next week.
All right.
So namaste. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Namaste.
All right.
Well and stay.
Thanks, everybody.
Hope we can have,
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you.
hope we can have higher
you.
expression. Thank you, Jonathan,
So-
everyone.
Thank you.